like he's shaking and chilled, and
Oh my
and
goodness.
I told him maybe he should just not come then. So let
Come
me, I'm
from
just,
bed.
yeah, right. Come on, Christian. Well, hi. Well, I'm so glad to be with you all tonight and to be able to engage some with this text. And kind of what I was thinking, and we'll get started more officially with this. I'll say a gathering prayer for us as we begin, but is just to kind of I'll go through the text and kind of highlight some things and then see what's, things that had jumped out or connected for you. So I'll do a little bit of just like situating that part of, in the case with the first letter, I'll just situate that a little bit. And then as we go through the second piece, which is in sections, just kind of overview, but then go a little bit by little bit through it and see just what kind of also came up for you. And we can just see where the conversation goes from there. I'm especially wanting us to think about this text, I think, in view of the continued wrestling we're also having with the congregation with our name and with what does it mean for us to be the church. And I'm wondering if, just wanted to put that out there because I know as I was reading this again, I was thinking a lot about that, about us in view of reading this text. So let's pray as we gather, and then we'll converse. And God, who is the God of all of us, we pray that you by your Spirit would continue to open us, that we might hear your voice and the voices of all of our siblings. God, indeed, that your kingdom and your love and your justice and your work in us would be continuing, that we would indeed be formed by your love and transformed by it so as to live it. God, we give you thanks for the life and legacy of James Baldwin. And we pray for the people in our midst who are the writers and thinkers who are wrestling and seeking to invite us to dream worlds anew. Might there not be little boys who at 13 learn fear of the streets in the same way. So in your name we gather this night, God, and give thanks. Amen. Well, hi, everyone. It's good to see you. So I see we have Judy and Elgin, and I'm Sarah, and Linda, and Betty, and Debbie, and Elaine. And we have both the Strings. Hello. We have both Sherry and Pat. Hi, Cheryl. And then hi, Teresa. Welcome. And is that knitting or crocheting?
I'm crocheting.
Crocheting.
And don't call on me.
Okay.
Don't call on me at all. I'm here for the hearsay edition.
The hearsay edition. Well, welcome. I don't force participation. I always say participation is invitational. So, and no one gets graded. So that's also
Thank
true.
you.
Okay. So, we'll start at the beginning. The Fire Next Time is the compilation of two different pieces. The first piece is entitled My Dungeon Shook, a letter to my nephew on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation. In this text, and we've talked a little bit about this in other places about how his writing a letter to his nephew has become really paradigmatic for a lot of other writers who are particularly writing about matters of race and life. So in I Am Still Here, Black Dignity, for the Austin Channing Brown book, she has the letter that she writes in it. You see this in Ta-Nehisi Coates' work, where his whole book is the letter to his son that he does. And so here James Baldwin is writing on the occasion of the 100th anniversary to his nephew. And, writing to him out of this sense of the world and the context in which they're living, and speaking to him just about his own, connecting him to his father's story, and that sense of like, basically, what is Black dignity? Like, what does it mean to persist and continue in a world that is bent on destroying you? He raises some really, I think, things I would love to talk about and hear your own thoughts and responses. In this text, he raises the sense of how, I think basically his interpretation is that so much of white culture and white people have been formed to believe our own innocence and have been structured to not understand or to not, we just haven't lived like the experience of Black people and how there's both the personal level at which that innocence functions, but there's also the structural level at which that functions, in terms of the formation of ghettos, as he names. And so he's naming, like, basically to his nephew, you're living in this world in which like you were treated the way you were for no other reason than because you were Black, and you were supposed to accept your lot in life, accept that you essentially were nothing, or less than nothing. And so in this, then he also wrestles with some of the themes related to acceptance and integration, and kind of what does it mean to hold oneself and one's dignity in a world that isn't designed for you to be able to embrace a love of yourself. I think he raises some other interesting themes around how he talks about loving white people and the need for that, and the need for white people's transformation to become human, for also the freedom of Blacks. And yeah, and so in this, he also is talking about, he talks a little bit about then integration or not, and what it means to actually show up as a Black person in the world, daring to love oneself, kind of through one's presence and persistence, being an embodiment of a confrontation with a world that is designed to kill and erase you. And just a sense of, like, our freedom, you know, here at this 100th anniversary, our freedom as Black men and Black people is deeply connected to the freedom of our white siblings, and that this work needs to continue if there's to actually be freedom. And in the meantime, what does it mean to live more free ourselves, and to not be shaped or not be defined by these structures that are meant to kill us, and to continue to live towards another world. So that's just kind of an arc, I think, of some of the pieces in this first letter. How about for those of you who had an opportunity to read it, were there things that really, you know, stuck out to you, things that you wanted to be able to talk with others about? Just feel free to jump in if that's the case for you.
I was kind of struck by when he said on page 7, well, he was worthless, and then you were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. You know, they never expected them to do anything, and then think how frustrating that would be. If you were a very smart Black person and you wanted to better yourself, and you were never expected to.
I really appreciate you also naming, I think, a thing that like, what does it mean as a reader to have empathy for one, you know, like, that might not have been my experience, but to wonder, but what if it were?
Yeah.
And it also makes me think, I think I've quoted this before, but I'll never forget the first time I read Jane Eyre. And in it, Charlotte Bronte had Jane Eyre at one point comments, and she says, it's a mistake to suppose that a woman does not want to see the world the way that a man wishes to see the world. And I just remember reading that as, I think, a sophomore in high school, and being like, see, I'm not alone in this thing, but living in a world that had taught both Charlotte Bronte and myself also that wasn't what I was supposed to aspire to. So yeah, so he's naming that. And for his nephew, the ways in which there's the particular sense that, like, it really got to his dad, that sense that you are nothing, that you're, yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Julie.
I lost the connection for a moment, so maybe I missed something that was already said, because I don't know what I did.
Jump in.
You know, when he's telling his nephew that you must accept them, and he said you must accept them with love. And thinking back on your podcast, Sarah, what you and Kristen were talking about, where is the love piece? Where is the action piece? And he does talk about that. You were posing a question. It was like he brings out the love piece, and it just, I just felt good that he was bringing the love piece into it. But he also says that another line that I highlighted: to act is to be committed, and to be committed is in danger. He's also really laying a good groundwork for his nephew.
Thanks for sharing that, naming that. How did that, like, yeah, for you, it sounds like, naming and seeing him talk about that. Like, how did that impact you as you were reading him naming about love and the need for that? Like, how did that hit you and impact how you were reading him?
I liked that. So how did it impact me? I guess I just felt somewhat encouraged. I mean, he was being very, very honest about where we are, or where, the race that time probably still is. But he was telling his nephew that, well, that one thing he says about my dungeon shook and my chains fell off. There needs to be some action along with this. And I feel that this group, we talk a fair amount about action. What can we do? And how can we help people understand, encourage understanding of this situation that is still here.
Thanks for sharing, Linda. Yeah. Elaine, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was struck by the same statements, but kind of almost incredulous that he could see so clearly the evil that has been perpetrated and the oppression and all of that. And throughout this whole book, he names it for what it is, but that he keeps coming back to the notion of loving. And I don't know where he gets the capacity to love in that. I mean, it's extraordinary, really, that he keeps coming back to that fundamental truth, but it is very generous of him, it seems to me.
Thanks for sharing and naming that.
The same section reminds me of the inequities in education today. And he's talking about integration there. And, I think about the school systems. And when was this book written? In the 80s or earlier, wasn't it? No,
no, the 60s.
60s.
Yeah, I think it was 62 and 63.
Here we are, 50 years later. And our discrepancy in education in Minnesota is the worst in the nation. And you think about the schools, a lot of us live in the western suburbs, and I get around a lot because I've in education, plus I have grandchildren now, and so I'm in different school districts and a great nephew. I mean, the facilities, the places, the wealth of resources. And then you think of the schools. I saw a TV feature on a school, maybe it was in Brooklyn Center or somewhere, the huge discrepancy, and talking about his nephew and his opportunities and how you have to settle for mediocrity. Well, we are allowing that to happen for thousands of kids every year in Minnesota. And one of them is in the inequity in our education system. That's my fund. That's where I put my a lot of my advocacy work. So this strikes me. We haven't gotten a whole lot better, and we may, in some ways, have retrenched. It seemed like that. Of course, I was young then. It seemed like that civil rights movement in the work of the 60s. It was so. And it was because it was fresh and a passion, and now it seems different. But then I'm 50 years older, so anyway, that's enough.
Thanks for sharing that, and also for naming that as like in the context of our own Twin Cities too, and how that continues to show up. Others, like noticing things that connected, things that you're sitting with.
Well, at the end of page 9, it says, if the word integration means anything, this is what it means, that we with love shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. I mean, he really puts us in a very bad place, doesn't he?
Can you say more about that?
Well, I think he paints the white people as just really misguided, and you know, he just, so many places, it seems like we're just really not very responsive, not very empathic, and we're just, you know, we don't see it. We refuse to look at it and see it.
But Judy, isn't part of it a challenge? You know, you can look at it as a positive challenge too,
That's true.
versus how bad we are. But he's constantly challenging.
Yeah. But I mean, I really feel like we're really bad.
Yeah, and I think you're. I mean, I think that's part of his sense, and we'll get into this more in the next section too. You know, as he's making the connection between, you know, as he's talking about and really doing a deep analysis of our country at his time, which again, as we're naming, is not done. We fixed everything, so we're good now. You know, but how he continued, I mean, one of the things he names is, and I think he says this here, and part of his critique of integration is he's like, well, why would I want to integrate into a thing that's actually designed to kill me? You know, but then in terms of just acceptance, like, I'm just, you know, gonna hope for kind of the crumbs that are actually poisoned to kill me. You know, but what he's saying then is, no, if there's going to be integration, if that means anything, like what it needs to be is to be that sense of like, I'm going to show up before you and in my own sense of dignity and truth, and challenge and provoke, thinking of that word from, you know, Jeff's sermon a couple of weeks ago, provoking you to awaken, that you believe that your innocence, because, and he talks about this more in the next section, I think really well, where he talks about basically like, we need to love white people because their self-hatred is actually so great. Like what has happened in the formation of white people that actually makes them not able to be human, because that's part of his thing, is like the failure of Christian formation, the failure of these things where it's like you're not loving your neighbor. You're saying you aspire to these ideals of freedom, et cetera, but you're not. And so I don't want to participate in that, but I want to participate in freedom. So let's all live into that together. And so I think, you know, for him, part of the sense is, I think that sense of when he's talking about innocence is that we've actually been fed a lie. And so I think of this for me from that the Christian formation perspective of, you know, that ways in which you've been tutored, or our minds have been not awakened or enlivened to the light of Christ, and that sense of that call to rebirth and renewal, that movement from flesh to spirit. In a way, that's where I think he for me is one of those prophetic voices who is then saying, you know, kind of the voice in the desert saying, awake people, like get baptized and don't sin anymore, you know, like. And so I think it's painful, and he acknowledges that a lot of times, including even on page 9, he says any upheaval in the universe, this is middle of the page, as he's talking about how so much of being formed as a white person in the United States, this is about your identity, you know, and I'm a white American and I love America and I love, and how he's like, it's painful if you start to like tear that apart when that's been a place of meaning and identity. He's like, I think he has some level of awareness and empathy for that the upheaval of the universe is terrifying because it is so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own reality. And I think we've, just to offer my commentary here, because I think that's one of the things I've been, you know, thinking a lot about name change, and the wrestling that we've had in our own community, and recognizing that for a lot of us in our community, like there's that pain of you have meaning, and this has been a place where you've encountered God and beautiful things have happened and all these things. And that it's not about delegitimizing that as true of your experience. And yet to face that can be really, really painful. But that doesn't mean that you still don't have to awaken in a different way, right? They're not morally equivalent. One is laden with grief, but the other is literally causing the death of Black people. You know, and so he's naming, yes, this is real. So we have to come in with love, because that's the only way salvation can happen here for folks, you know. And so yeah, that's a lot of what he's packing into 10 pages or 9, however many. It's actually not even 10 pages, it's 3 to 10. Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
Well, there was something that, I mean, every page I marked something, but this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I, nor time, nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives, and do not know it, and do not want to know it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
What page is
It's
that?
that's
page
on
5.
page 5.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay.
What's interesting, maybe interesting isn't the right word, but in my whole life, I've known that there were people in this country that didn't get a fair shake. They didn't get health care, they didn't have job opportunities, they didn't have education. But somehow that didn't affect me.
Oh,
And now it just seems so much more important to me.
yes. Mhm.
For sure.
And that certainly tells you something about some flaw in me.
Are
I
you all,
think-
yeah, go ahead, Elaine.
I was just going to say, the thing that grieves me is that that sentence in there, that they do not know it and do not want to know it. It's
Yeah.
not
That's
wanting to
one.
know it, wanting to avoid it, wanting to kind of gloss over it or
Mhm.
back away from it. You know, there is a fear, and he talks about that, fear of self-loathing, fear of maybe retaliation, fear of
Yeah.
facing the truth. But, you know, I mean, maybe we are seeking to face it and understand it. But I mean, how many people are not? It's, you know, at the end, he says, you know, I know that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon. And, you know, it's 60 years from then, and we're still beginning to awaken. But I mean, there's so much more to awaken to. Anyway, we can't be free until they are free, as he says. So it's a long struggle.
I was talking to Rick about this, and I don't know, somehow the date of when it was written came up, and said, oh, so it's 50 years behind the times. And I said, no, that's the heartbreak. It's right up to date.
I know. I had
Nothing's
people say that
changed.
too. Oh, that was 50 years ago. It's different now. I don't think so.
Well, I mean, the names and the news and the Black Muslims have kind of moved on to be replaced, but it's all the same issues. People are still in the same boat. In fact, they're worse off.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
what are we going to do about it?
It's great. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I think like, and you know, so for me, part of the answer is like continuing to do our own work, like continuing, and not that like both the inner work and then the embodiment of showing up too. I think challenging and inviting, I mean, just again, candidly, like this is why for me, like the name changes, like, can we be Christian? You know, like these are the things about like, these are the things that, you know, whether it's doing advocacy in the schools, because I mean, that's part of your background and your work, Betty, but it's also your grandkids, it's, you know, but what does it mean to keep wrestling and challenging ourselves and our siblings to say, I think that's like it, to say, let's be Christian and like, let's wrestle, like, let's awaken. And that we do that together too. And that through that, like, because that's part of what he's naming too, is that there's a profound, like, until people awaken, you're going to continue having these experiences like he does, where he's going down the street and has the police officers who stop and frisk him and, you know, call him the names that they do. And Elijah Muhammad's dad gets lynched, and just the continued legacies. And so I think that's, I mean, and then whatever else from there, I'm in for.
How can we as a church, though, do something that engages individuals or gives individuals an outlet? What can we organize? What can we go after? Changing a name is just one small piece. What's the next piece? Or and I'm not laying that on you, Sarah. I'm just saying, as a church, how can we discover that together?
You know, I feel like I'm stepping ahead, but you know, didn't Christian say this a little bit in his presentation at the annual meeting? We are going to have the Gulick lecture series or weekend, and going to dig pretty deep. And I think this, Cheryl, you maybe have, I don't know if it's okay that I say that, but I think we're looking in this direction. I mean, that's one thing, to really have people wrestle and talk about what they can do. That's just one thing that I know is in the works.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about activism in the community, aren't you, Algin? But this, we hope this will be reaching out to the community beyond the membership of the church.
And I think, and again, and this is me, and I'm not a quietist on stuff, but I think that there is something really important both about continuing to do individually our own work, but then like this is where even the name change is about our corporate call to one another. You know, I mean, and that's just part of that, but that continued like challenging and inviting, like that stuff matters, like how we show up and who we are and how we are in space and how we call each other to be, because we can continue, for instance, like we can do what we would say is, oh, I'm doing good, but I'm still the one who's actually like, I'm still locked into the same patterns. I know you talk about this with Michelle all the time, you know, too, Elgin, like where we're still locked in the patterns where then I think, oh, I'm going to come in. And I mean, he talks about this in the text where he's like, so now then the white people are going to legislate all of the rules and all of the things and tell us what justice looks like. And you know, in that sense of continuing to also do one's own work, and that these things go together, the action, the reflection, the becoming, the being, and how do we challenge, like that's literally part of why I came to be at this church, was I was like, I am a white person from the suburbs. And so if you want like to work on white people stuff, like go be with your white people and work on how do we become more Christian in view of a world where racism is real. Teresa, go ahead.
So my background is I represent indigent people in child protection in Ramsey County, and I serve on a advisory committee for changing over rules on police officer standards. So what I've been hearing from the BIPOC community is they want us to shut up and listen and let them lead. It's not because it becomes so whitewashed whenever we put our whitewashing onto what are we hearing. And so I keep that in mind, especially when I'm talking to a client who's of a different race or of a different background. And and what I always keep in the back of my mind is, what are they asking me to represent? Right. So if they're asking me to represent kindness, you know, then show the kindness. If they're asking, you know, and that's sometimes that ask is overt, sometimes it's, you know, implied. And I think where we have to come as a community is supporting sister churches who have those primary denomination or primary minority groups as their core of their church, and helping support them in leading the change that they want to see in the world.
Thank you for sharing, and thanks for sharing some of your work and your story too. I appreciate getting to hear some of that. Elaine, did you want to?
Yeah, I was wondering how we might be able to join with other churches, and particularly Black churches would be great, and seeing ways that we could witness or support or be allies to, and see what, we have the first anniversary of the George Floyd killing coming up. What is going on? Are there things that we might participate in that show that we want to be a part of the solution? So I'm wondering if there are things that are going on in the churches, maybe North Side churches. I know I have invited Asela So Young, who is the new executive director of Urban Homeworks, which is a Christian organization that works on affordable housing. I've invited her to speak to our Women's Renewal group on June 10th. And one of the things I've asked her to tell us about is what is going on the North Side. What are the needs there, but also, just help us to just even know more about life on the North Side and the various groups and things going on there that are trying to move this forward. So that's, maybe she can give us some insights too.
Thanks for sharing.
Maybe one of the things that might be helpful is for us to think about, we changed the name. Now, what's next? What's the next name change activity that the church gets involved in? What's the next name change that the church has to struggle with?
I'm on the missions resource team, and we're in discussion now within the team to create a partnership agreement between Colonial and Zion Baptist Church, which is a African American church on the North Side somewhere. So Jeff has met with a pastor, and Paul Bertelson has met with a pastor, and trying to figure out how we can create some partnering with that church. So we are having in this discussion now with a Black church on how Colonial can be in participation in partnership with a Black church right in our own area. So it's being discussed right now.
Good to know.
Thanks for sharing.
I thought one of the problems was after the unrest around George Floyd's death, all these white churches were flocking to Black churches and saying, we want to partner with you. We want you to tell us about things. And they said, wasn't a message that we heard from them is that, we don't want to have to tell you how things are. We want you to find out yourself. You have to do a little work. You have to sit back and let us tell you what's going on. Find out yourself. Now, how you do that, I don't know, because maybe just being involved somehow. But it sounded like they were a little tired of always having to teach us.
Yep.
I suspect
part
they're
of
way
why-
more than, I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, I suspect they're way more than a little tired of it.
Yeah.
I think
And
they're exhausted of it.
Yes,
Yeah. And I think that's precisely why we made the decisions this year to be reading particularly Black authors and watching, Black films particularly. And I think for me, one of the things, some of you know, Audre Lorde was a poet and writer. And when I taught spiritual formation at United, her text, Sister Outsider, was one of the central texts I use. And I basically in it, and I think there's some echoes with Baldwin here, where she really challenges and encourages. She's like, white people, go do your own work and then meet me in the land where we can be human again. Because she's like, until you do your inner work and can touch into some of this stuff, you're going to keep scapegoating me as the angry Black woman, and because you're so afraid of your own anger. So she's like, I want to be human with you, but I can't do that for you. And so I think part of this is, and even what he's saying here, part of, I think, what we've been trying to do is to rupture white innocence and say, what does it mean for us gathered here and for our community, for us to keep leaning into who is God inviting us to become? What does discipleship mean? What does it mean to do discipleship in a world where racism is real? And like you'd pointed out with page 5, that quote about that sense in which we don't want to know, right? And we haven't known, we haven't wanted to know, etc. And what does it mean to actually go into that spot of saying, like, I want to be humble of heart and hear and listen? And so I think this is one of the ways. And then I think other ways through building relationships with churches, etc. But I think that's exactly why, though, we've been doing this year, is to want to say, most of us didn't grow up like having any of these experiences. I was a white person, I didn't have these experiences, and so how can we hear and then be formed anew? Go ahead.
There's a quotation I've internalized that was about something else entirely, but the gist of it is, I can teach you about things, but I can't understand for you. You have to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. And Linda?
I think when you were referring, or you mentioned before, that it's each individual has to do his or her own work. I think that's extremely important. And I think that's what we're doing now. We are really wanting to understand. However, what I am finding difficult is that I am too timid to talk to those who are not on the same page. I have been getting emails from people that just astound me. And I don't quite know how to react to them now. And so I'm perfectly comfortable talking with us. But when I get out of this safe environment, I have trouble. And that's my own personal journey that I have to do. Going back, I'm thinking again of August Henning Brown, and that she was one of them who said, go out and do your own work. And so that's just a personal aside that
I just like to build on that, because I think we need to do our own work, but I think doing it in a community is critical.
Yeah.
But it bothers me that we are in a safe environment, and a lot of us have been in every single one of these faith and justice sessions, and we've read all the books and watched movies, and I'm so grateful, and I've learned so much. It troubles me, though, we're just a little microcosm of the colonial church. And I just, like, when I read White Too Long, I thought, well, everybody in the church should be reading this, or this little book, which didn't take hardly any time to read. We should all be reading it and discussing it. But I don't know how you do it. It does bother me that how do it, Linda, you've voiced it. How do we talk to people? I think there's a lot of people that share our concerns, but we don't know, and we're not having that conversation with the larger congregation. And that is a challenge.
Yeah. Thanks for naming that. Yeah. Teresa, go ahead.
Well, so before Pastor Sarah, there was Pastor Danielle. And I remember Pastor Danielle, it was right at the height of Trump and Hillary. And she had this powerful sermon about women and sexism. And after the sermon, this man, and I was about to go up to her and thank her for this awesome sermon. And this man who was a member at Colonial and was telling her how he was an engineer and that sexism is not a thing. And I was so flabbergasted that I spoke up at that moment. And I was like, I'm a woman lawyer. Don't, but so I think, like, it has been broached. We've tried talking about isms from, I've seen the pastoral staff talk and address isms from the pulpit. And from my experience with serving the outside urban communities has been
it comes down to, we got to show our love, be a servant. That's really the heart of it. And if we can find ways to serve other churches, I think that's what they're looking for in the inside change is, are we going to show the love and serve where they are asking for service?
Yeah. I really appreciate Linda, all y'all, thanks for sharing. And Linda, thanks for naming that. And that's real too. And I think it's, it's also, it takes, like I remember the first time I publicly named my own truths about anything, and right. And it was terrifying, and I was quite sure I was going to die. And then I didn't, but just that sense of also, I really appreciate you naming that. And I know it's not everything, but I also know that like all of you showing up here and being in this community also is something. And I also do believe in mustard seeds. And yes, sometimes like I also am like, God, does this work? Spirit, are you working on that? Like, what's happening? And yet also believing in mustard seeds and that it also is a long view, right? Like in one hand, 1962, a lot hasn't changed and things have changed. And, so how do we keep staying in that work? And so I'm really grateful to be in it with you all. And I think that what you named too, Betty, of having a community, and also being able to wrestle then together of what does this mean? And how do we keep living it out together and reminding each other too, that you're not alone. I know it's not everything, but I'm grateful for it. So, thanks for sharing. Hi. Can we go to the second letter? The second piece.
I went there.
Down at the cross, a letter from a region of my mind. That sounds very James Baldwin-y. Okay, so in this one then, there's a few different sections of it. The first section goes, I think, until page 45, maybe, if my memory's right. No, I wasn't right. I was close. 47. So in the first section of this letter, starting on page 15, then he begins to outline, he does impart a narration of his own kind of coming of age. And a significant portion of that being his experience of waking up both to the dangers of the world and of being a Black man in the world, and the possibilities, the limited horizons for himself, and the way that intersects with his movement in his teenage years towards Christianity. And that connection for him between God and safety, between, again, those encounters with the effects of structural racism, stop and frisk, even though it wasn't officially named that at the time. And some of these also, he peppers it in as, as you also noted, Judy, he peppers it in then also with commentary as he's going along about, for instance, the failure, what I would name as the failure of Christian formation. And so he's interspersing his own coming of age, his own movement towards God and the church, his own desperation to escape the horrors of the limited horizon, and wedding that with his own cultural, sociological analysis of the church, of the United States, of Christianity itself, and how fear and just basically what happens in that dehumanization and the failure of recognition of Black people, particularly in Harlem and then beyond. And he just does a really, I think, thorough analysis and critique of those forces and how they're at play, leading to him coming to a point when faith fails him, and just his own kind of awakening and wrestling with the world as he's coming into deeper awareness, and the wrestling with Christian faith and what it's doing to him and to others, and how all of how folks are shaped, how Black people are shaped by all of these different forces. And so those are some of the threads: his personal story wedded with a sociological analysis, wedded with the ways in which the fear and the need for safety is all intersecting with his looking at the ways in which whiteness and racism functions. So that's 1 to 47 in a flyby. Now we can go back through a little bit more. Are there particular parts that really stood out to you that you wanted to make sure to talk about with others?
Well, I'm confused now. So where does his second letter start?
Yep, page 15.
I'm sorry, page what?
15, 1-5.
I'm not confused.
And it actually goes through the end, but I'm just saying the letter itself, I think there's kind of 3 distinct sections. And so I just was, instead of trying to summarize the entire thing in one breath, I thought I'd just do to page 47. And any thoughts or go ahead.
He seemed to be struggling sexually. Was he? I don't know. Was he homosexual or was he?
Yep.
He was.
Yeah, he was a gay man, and for him, that's all. That's, and he doesn't name that in the second section a lot. When he's talking about, there's I think when he gets to the Elijah Muhammad and that section, but that's I think another thread at play there. And if anyone's either read or seen any Elijah Muhammad's work or read the Autobiography of Malcolm X, like there's such a particular kind of masculinity that's again a reach for power and is very homophobic, and for him that that just wasn't gonna work. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm looking at page 39 and it's pretty hard to not have reactions to. In the middle of the page, there's a sentence, I felt like that I was committing a crime and talking about the gentle Jesus. And then down lower, it says, I really mean that there was no love in that. In the church, it was a mask for hatred and self-hatred and despair. Woo, those are pretty, like, wow statements.
Yeah. Do you want to say 39?
Thank you.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to say? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, they're that section where he's really condemning the church and especially the white church. It goes on the next page. And then the transferring power of the Holy Ghost ended when the service ended, and salvation stopped at the church door. When we were told to, that's the top of the next page 40, when we were told to love everybody. I thought that meant everybody, but no. It applied only those who believed as we did, and it did not apply to white people at all. I mean, that's just hits it all head on.
Yeah, I think this is actually, and I know not everyone feels this way, I'm sure, but like for me, I think one of the things I actually love the most about this letter, and appreciate so much about his work, because I actually think I resonate with him a lot, is that sense of his critique of the failure of Christian formation. And having just spent a week rewriting my Dietrich Bonhoeffer chapter, I think that's just so that same echo is in Bonhoeffer, right? Like we've accepted cheap grace, and he's critiquing the German white church to say you've accepted a cheap grace that isn't grace at all, and in fact all it actually is a pretense for power and for all of these ways in which you're insulating yourself. Meanwhile, you can allow for a whole group of people to be sent to their death. And so although he's coming from it, Baldwin, from the location of being a Black man, there's this similar sort of like he's acknowledging his reach for Christianity gave him a sense of identity and meaning, but then acknowledging that which is a big critique inside of the Black church, is when leaders are actually driving Cadillacs and everyone else is poor, and the complexities of how this is happening. And he doesn't have tolerance for it. He's like, if you're going to be Christian, like live out a love ethic. If you're going to be Christian, like and seeing the failure of that, not just in the white church, but in the Black church as well.
Yeah.
Right. and in himself. Like he was like very clearly in myself. Yeah.
You know, and before that, on page 31, before we get to what we were talking about, I just thought it was so profound. He said, you know, that whole thing when he fell on the floor and he was doing the altar call, and okay, then after that, and he said he was able to see that the principles governing the rights and customs of the churches in which he grew up did not differ from the rights and customs of other churches, right? And this next sentence just threw me. The principles for blindness, loneliness, and terror. So awful. And then he says, I would love to believe that the principles were faith, hope, and charity, but what is not so for most Christians, or what we call the Christian world. That theme that he kind of goes through, that this letter is Christianity. What are we doing as a Christian? Are we through with ourselves, or are we just playing a big game with this love?
Well, and this is where we were talking about this with the Loving God's Earth on Sunday. I was talking about Sally McFaig, who's a Christian theologian, and her big work has been around metaphors for God. And her big argument is that the metaphors that we have for God it's deeply shape the way we actually live. You know, so if we think God is this sovereign, angry parent in the sky who's ready to condemn us all to hell in the next breath, that impacts how you show up in the world. You know, it impacts how you live with shame, how you look on violence, etc. You know, so these metaphors, these ways of understanding really impact us. And so this sense for him that even though for Christians, for instance, we'll say like God is love is a central tenet of Christian faith, he's dissecting it and saying, no, that's not actually the dominant operative principle. What's actually at place is terror management and the ways in which you know, we have this sort of blind obedience where we don't want to see and we don't want to know. And it's not exclusive of the white church. This is also something like this kind of way of doing faith also helps Black people who are faced with the reality of a world that wants to kill them. If I can just not have to deal with it, I can feel better. But he's like, but this doesn't actually solve the problem. And so I just, that's one of his other critiques, is to say, to trouble that and to say that's also a failure of Christian formation. It's actually terror management. It's not really helping anyone be better people. Yeah. What I'm talking about. I have a friend, just as I guess another note on that section, I wrote in the because I highlighted the same. I've highlighted all the parts that you all have highlighted too, which is kind of fun. My friend Erica just graduated with her dissertation 2 Fridays ago, and she is a Catholic. And she did it on the way that the child is understood inside of Catholic moral theology and Catholic, whatever they call the catechumes, the process of the Christian formation for children. And she did her dissertation is a deep critique of the ways in which actually the child is understood as a non-person in many ways, and the ways in which the central theme of formation is actually to develop obedience. And she makes the connection between that both conception of who is the child and what is the point of formation, resulting in a church that was willing to look the other way and sacrifice their own children at the hands of clergy sexual abuse scandals. So her central work is she's wanting to say we have to radically change the way we understand who the child is and how we understand formation so that we no longer allow for our children to be harmed. So she's doing a similar sort of analysis to say these metaphors and models and what's actually the center shapes how we live. And so if you think that God is love and God's actually for you, that's going to be a different sort of way of being Christian than God hating us all and going to smite us the next day. You'll live differently.
I can see why people maybe don't want to think about all this. It's pretty deep.
Chill. Which is why, right? I mean, and again, to go to Bonhoeffer, like this is why he says, this is the cost of discipleship. Like it isn't a cheap grace. It is a costly grace. It's a costly grace that brings our life, right? And it definitely brings life, but it's life through taking up the cross. It's life through death. It's life through having to let go our ego, to convert, to repent, to change, to be transformed. And it's not easy, right? It's not that there, so I think Bonhoeffer's right, where he's like, there is a cost to discipleship. And yeah, acknowledging that like thinking of the young man who went home sad, right? And when he had like literally had Jesus before him. And you're like, yeah, I guess that actually makes sense, you know? Other thoughts are about this section that you wanted to make sure? I think one other thing I know for me that really struck me in this section is I was thinking a lot about, and I think this connects some with what you all named earlier. I was thinking about what is the impact on one's being of living with constant humiliation? Like what happens, because he's naming a lot from his own recognition of himself and the other adults in his world. Like, what does it mean to like be a grown up and feel humiliated and feel like you can't care for or protect your own kid? It made me think about, I remember being in my early 20s on the subway coming from, I had a friend who was studying at Fordham, so we were in the Bronx, going down to, Lower Manhattan, and there was this Black mother who was, had her young son, and he wasn't listening to her, and she just like started screaming at him and like grabbed him. And I, as a like 24-year-old young white woman, was like, how could she be so terrible to her kid? Oh my gosh, she's like abusing her kid, and she's like grabbing him and she's yelling at him. And, and so I kind of like was like intervening and doing kind of a like, hey, hi, buddy, it's okay. And I remember reading a few years later, like a Black woman saying, like, if I let my kid misbehave in white spaces, do you know what happens to them? And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I just thought she was a bad mom, right? And so just this sense of how he's narrating what it means to live in a world that actually like constrains your own humanity in such a way, and the humiliation of having to live with that day in and day out. And I think throughout this text, but I think in this first section, I think he captures that for him, how he experienced it in some really powerful ways. How about this, the 37? I knew that those sermons and tears and all that repentance and rejoicing had changed nothing. Keep going.
Okay. What does he think? What does he think the white people's? He keeps talking about the white people's problem. Until they can deal with it, they can't come together with. Is that in a later part, maybe? But he keeps talking about our problem. What does he see? I don't quite understand what he sees as our problem.
I don't know, and someone else if he says what the original sort of like wound or sin or kind of thing at the center that started it all. I don't know if he narrates that, but I think what it is a sense of that there's, I think, and he doesn't name it this way, but Christian ethicist Emily Towns, who's the dean at Vanderbilt, she talks about forgive me for a second, fantastic hegemonic imagination. And it's basically this way, and I think he doesn't yet have the language for this totally. He gets there in this text, but he doesn't yet really have language where for him, like I think there is a distinction between kind of the formation of becoming white and it's not just like, oh, white people, you're all just terrible, but he's like, there's something to having been formed white that kills white people. Like that there's something in this that destroys and harms your own humanity by feeding you a lie that actually is harming you too. And so in being formed in this lie of the reach for power, and that my identity is found in a persistent belief that I'm the pure race, I'm God's chosen group, etc., that it actually harms something so fundamentally in our own humanity that we're not even aware of the level of self-hatred and harm that we've internalized. And basically we scapegoat Black people then as a race to deal with all the stuff that we can't deal with in our own selves, that's broken and been harmed and in our own formation. And so he doesn't quite have the language yet that someone like Emily Towns or we read what's her face, Kelly Brown Douglas. So I do that, by the way, because I got hit by a Hummer once, and sometimes I can't, the brain part that connects names doesn't work. And if I do that, it helps my, it literally helps my brain to connect. Kelly Brown Douglas talks about that, like the myth of the Anglo-white Saxon. And so I think that can sometimes be helpful for white people. And if I think about it in terms of Christian language, it's like our old selves that have been formed to believe that all these lies about who got to count as human and how we counted as human, and the pathway to life and following Christ is to actually put to death the things of the flesh that are killing all of us and awaken to life in the spirit, which allows us then to inhabit our skin as part of the collective body of Christ. And so he doesn't have all of that language, but I think that he believes there's something to the formation of white people that we've had to experience in this world, that by being grown to be innocent, it actually is a profoundly destructive, harmful thing that kills us.
Well, isn't it at root this notion of white supremacy? You know, like at the very beginning, when he quotes Kipling, take up the white man's burden. I mean, the burden of being superior and having to, you know, whatever.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to go with Elaine.
I agree.
Yeah.
The visit to Muhammad is fascinating. And by the way, I
Great.
loved your podcast that you and Christian did, and you talked about this quite a bit.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk.
Yeah, we can absolutely. Yeah. So when he rounds out this section, just the one thing I wanted to note here as well is just wrestling with, again, thinking about our church and our wrestling with our name and with our own history, and with where to represent Elgin, what are we doing? Where are we going forward? He makes the connection then here between the ways in which, to use that language, right, like the white supremacy and the ways in which white Christianity has believed God is uniquely on our side, and that white people are superior, and that Black people have inherited the curse of Ham, how that intersects with white colonial, like the white missionary movement and white colonialism and imperialism are all connected, and how he critiques that as well. And just thinking about what is that challenge or ask or invite from us to have to wrestle with and face in our own continued formation and growth and repentance and change. So that's where he really ends this section then, is to say that he says, if it is not too much to say that whoever wishes to become truly human must divorce himself from the prohibition, crimes, hypocrisies of the Christian church. If the concept of God has any validity or any use, it can only be to make us larger, freer, and more loving. If God can not do this, it's time we got rid of him. And there's, interestingly, I think that last paragraph, he says it and he does get rid of God, right? He doesn't remain in the Christian church, but Bonhoeffer writes almost exactly the same stuff after, like at the very end of the war, right before he's killed, in Letters and Papers from Prison. He's writing the same sort of stuff, like if if we're going to bother being Christian, it better be about the task of liberation and freedom, and that is what it means to take up the cross and live the life of discipleship. Like that is the call to follow Jesus, in Bonhoeffer's language. So so then the next section, he goes, as you were pointing to, Betty, he goes to Elijah Muhammad. That section then goes through, what page? It keeps going. Does someone have it off the, oh, there it is, 82, the top of 82. So this is a longer section in which he outlines just more about the movement itself, his points of resonance, also where he agrees with their analysis, but as Christian talked about, I think in the podcast at length, he doesn't go there all the way though with them. So yeah, any thoughts or responses that you wanted to share about this section?
Well, he, like he says to his nephew, he basically comes to the conclusion that we need to stay and love. And he says on page 10, it is means that we with love shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friends. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again. And we can make America what America must become. And so rather than isolation or separation or maintaining the chasm of evil, whatever, that what amazes me is that despite all of his clarity on all of the problems, and on 85 he says, now there's simply no possibility of a real change in the Negro situation without the most radical and far-reaching changes in the American political and social structure. And it's clear that white Americans are not simply unwilling to affect these changes. They are, in the main, so slothful have they become unable even to envision them. I mean, all of this kind of despair, and yet he keeps coming back to love and stand and stay and work towards a better vision. So yeah, it's amazing that he doesn't lose hope.
Thank you. Betty, you're muted.
Just to build on that too, I found it intriguing just to be reminded of the belief system of the Nation of Islam and the exclusivity of that plan, and then repeating what Elaine said, in spite of all of his critique of the white ways of thinking and being in the Christian church. He also repudiate isn't maybe the word, but he kind of does. He really, you said that, Elaine, he believes at the end that the whites and blacks can do this. And goes off to be with his white friends and continue conversations that with people he felt he trusted. And so, yeah, he trusted there were people he loved and trusted that were white people. So he could not accept that exclusivity of the Nation of Islam. I mean, that's just a very simplistic couple thoughts.
But I think that really, and then we'll come to you, Teresa, that in the opening part where he's talking about his own desire and longing for recognition, like on all his levels of identity. And I think there's also, and we've talked a little bit about this, the sense in which the prescription for the solution is not workable for him on many layers. But one of them is that I really appreciated in both reading this and then when I did read the Autobiography of Malcolm X, Baldwin goes a different direction, because for him, it's not just white people and Black people, it's men and women and queer people and straight people, and it's all the people. Like, he wants a world for himself, for all of himself, but for all of us too. And I think that was, for me, when I had read Malcolm X, like seeing how the reach for a strong Black masculinity, that's been one of the critiques, not only for me as a white feminist, but for women of color, to say, where's the space for us? And that was another reason why I think for Baldwin, he couldn't go there, even though, it would have been great to say, whose son are you? I'm yours. And he's like, nope, I already said that once. I'm not going to do that again. But yeah, Teresa, go ahead.
So as I'm reading a little bit further down, and my book is paginated differently, he says one cannot give whatever without giving oneself, that is to say, risking oneself. If one cannot risk oneself, then one is simply incapable of giving. And so and that's one of, if I recall correctly, that's one of Colonial Church's core tenets. And so it really comes down, I feel we're so close as a community to already knowing. It's just that we have, sometimes it's finding the courage within to take that leap of faith and that risk on, what does the servanthood look like, and what does the loving look like in that support. And I think he's really coming down to that challenge of, can we risk giving that which it's antithetical for us to give something that would make us feel secure.
Thank you. Thanks.
That takes me to, I think it's kind of related, on page 62, shows his hopefulness. In the middle, he says it's a responsibility of free men to trust and to celebrate what is constant. Birth, struggle, and death are constant. So is love, the way not always think so, and to apprehend the nature of change, to be able and willing to change. I speak of change, not on the surface, but in the depths, change in the sense of renewal. And I feel that that's kind of where we're at with the church. Let's get this name changed, and we're on the cusp of change and renewal. And I love those three themes that Christian's going with: discipleship and discernment and community. Just that to me, that's a very hopeful, supportive statement from Baldwin that kind of speaks to where we're at. At least to me, I see a correlation there.
Thank you. And what page were you on? Oh, you're muted again. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted.
Oh,
I
no,
gotcha.
it's on page 92. Oh, I 92. Jumped beyond the letter. Sorry about
you're good.
that.
You're good. I thought you said 62, but I was like, I mean,
random tonight.
Great. You're being Baldwin-esque. That's not how you'd say it.
Oh, that makes me feel better. I feel like I'm jumping all over.
Well, let's go there. Let's go to 82 to the end. Go wherever you want to go in this section here.
Before we leave the section, I'm just looking at 71 when he is with Elijah again. And yes, I mean, this is profound, that I did not care if white and Black people married. I would, and let's see, and then he said, I said to myself, but not to Elijah, I love a few people and they love me. And some are white, and isn't love more important than color? So he goes back to that love all of it.
Yeah, that's parallel to that later part.
Thank you. Yeah, parts from this last section. So 82 then through 106.
Okay.
I'll say basically what he does is he outlines the continued need for change, that we're not yet all free. Do we really want to be free? And just do we want to take up what it means to live a responsible life? And continuing to critique the sense of what white Christian America, how it's understood itself, and that Black people in our country are a mirror to white people about the truth of who we are as a people and as a nation, et cetera. And really asking, like, do we want to take up the price of liberty? Do we really want to take up what freedom really means? Are we really willing to do that? Because it's going to take a great sense of resilience from us. And he again comes back to the European error about, right, you know, I mean, that's part of what happened in the failure of Christianity in Europe is that recognition that, like, we were the civilized Western Christian nations, and yet look what happened. And so he's saying, like, lest we become them, we need to hear and heed the prophetic warning and invitation here, and re-examine who we are and the political realities in which we live. And then, as Christian quoted in the podcast, the very end of 105 to 106, and is where he then does, I think, a really deep prophetic call to say, if we, and by now I mean we relatively conscious whites and relatively conscious blacks who must, like lovers, insist on and create the consciousness of the others, do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. You know, but then he says, but if we don't do that, then it won't just be the rainbow, no more water, but the fire next time. And so that's where he brings it. So from that, did any of those pieces really stand out or resonate? Or
I think in the podcast, Christian said we already have a lot of those fires. The fires are here. And I do not consider Don Lemon from CNN as a great literary giant or deep thinker, but he is a follower of Baldwin, and he has a bestseller book out now called This Is the Fire, and it's built on that theme from Baldwin. So that's just a piece of trivia. But I picked up on more that Christian said, the fire in the pod, or you did, one of you said that in the podcast, the fires are already here. Many fires.
I think too, though, I heard, like, I read that also, like, right, he's like, on one hand, there's the fires, which I think Christian was naming, right, like the fires in our own city last year, right? But then I think also the connection for him of the fire of what happened in Nazi Germany, and of the gas chambers and of those fires. And so it's like on one hand, we'll burn ourselves with, one way or the other, we'll destroy ourselves.
If we don't love each other.
If we don't love each other. And I love how he says that. Because I think that's one of the places is when people are like, well, you hate America. I'm like, no, I actually love America. Like I actually just want us to be the dream. And so where he says that, and achieve our country, when he says that clause, that's just so evocative to me of, like, it makes me think of Hamilton and of the possibility of promise of what we could be and can be, if we will but await end the racial nightmare.
I was taken by a sentence in the middle of page 102. And he was talking about, he just talked about the myth that Americans believe in, that we're such a great country and, all this wonderful stuff we've done. And then one felt that if one had that white man's worldly advantages, one would never have become as bewildered and as joyless and as thoughtlessly cruel as he. And I thought that's really sad. Sad commentary on this.
Thank you for sharing. Any other things from these last pages?
No, there's a lot in there.
The strings have been very quiet and attentive, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
Great. I have to ask you to unmute. It won't let me do it.
Can you unmute?
I cannot. They might. There we
Okay.
go.
There we go.
Hi, Lee.
We just got back from Arizona. We have not read it, so we didn't really have any comments to make for.
Thanks for being here and welcome home.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do read it. It's good.
Yeah,
We will.
yeah, we definitely will. Yeah.
So in thinking about what Elgin was saying is what we can do as a church, the men's group that meets on Friday mornings, they have been going to the prisons for over 40 years and talk with a number of the prisoners and help them. And then when their time is up, and most of these people are Black, and they have done a great deal to get them back into society. One of the things I've noticed is they're never brought to church, or at least to our church, and maybe they don't want to come, I don't know. And I was thinking of the families that we help, was it 3 times a year where they're in transition? And,
Yep, families moving forward. Yep.
Yeah, and my attendee, Lee and I's attendance to those functions, most of those people are African American. And if there's any follow-up with them after they leave the church, if we can give them any more help, so that that's a different type of contact. A number of years ago, we were in touch with a church in North Minneapolis, and the minister was on the State House of Representatives, and he preached a number of times and at Colonial. And I don't know what we did in following up with his church. And today, Westminster Church had a replay of Reverend Moss's presentation, and he's an African American, well thought of, and I didn't get to hear the whole presentation. But anyway, I was just thinking there are a number of things that we could try to work on to make a better connection and show our love. And the other thing I was thinking about, what the African American people go through here, women in Afghanistan are going through in a very deadly way. And the people in Myanmar who are a different tribe, exiled over to Bangladesh. So there's a lot of this that goes on in the world. And in fact, there isn't a lot of love out there right now, which is really disappointing way around, and that hurts. And it shows you what happens if you get a leader who doesn't think much of love, just of himself. And I find it sorry here in the United States that how many people followed him, because things are worse now than they were 4 years ago. So I don't know, maybe you've heard enough. Maybe you've heard enough from the Strangs, but anyway.
No, thank you. Thanks, Elaine, too, for kindly inviting, not calling you up, but kindly inviting you. No, thank you for that. And it made me think of, I think I had I think to that living love, just as a closing, some of you had seen, I'd posted on Facebook the other day a poem prayer from Dorothy Zola. Dorothy Zola is the second old school theologian who features in the dissertation. She was born the same year as Anne Frank, as a German Christian, German Lutheran. And her awakening happened when at the age of 18, she read the Diary of Anne Frank and realized that she had they were born the same year and she had survived and Anne Frank hadn't. For her, so much of her sense of what it meant to follow Christ for Dorothy Zola was really connected, I think, to what you were just naming to Bill, with that call to love and to show up in the world, to not just think it, but to actually embody it and be it. And so I'll just close us tonight with Dorothy Zola's words as an invitation then to join with Baldwin's prophetic invitation for us to be people who live love and then live our faith in the world. This is a poem prayer called Dream Me, God. It's not you who should solve my problems, God, but I yours, God of the asylum seekers. It's not you who should feed the hungry, but I who should protect your children from the terror of the banks and armies. It's not you who should make room for the refugees, but I who should receive you. Hardly hidden God of the desolate, you dreamed me, God. Practicing walking upright and learning to kneel down, more beautiful than I am now. Happier than I dare to be, freer than our country allows. Don't stop dreaming me, God. I don't want to stop remembering that I am your tree, planted by the streams of living water.
Wow.
Thanks y'all for being here. It's great to be with you. Grateful for you and for your sharing, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Take
all
good
these
care.
faith and justice series. It's been a great year of really taking us deep, and it was very good. Thank you for you and Christian.
Grateful.
Thank you
I'm
all.
grateful for y'all. Thank you very
Carol,
much.
may I ask you a minute before you hang up when everybody else is through? Can I just talk to you for a second?
Oh, yep. Give me one sec.